Welcome to a really special episode of the Don't Sue Us Please podcast. Normally, for our interviews, we talk about the behind the scenes content for our series Wonder Woman Spirit of Truth. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. Our wonderful creative producer, Nora Barpal, and our amazing writer, John Petrie, sat down for a one on one conversation about Pride Month and how the LGBTQIA plus community is represented in comics. It's amazingly wholesome and heartwarming. There are also some great recommendations for comics at the end. I hope you enjoy this wonderful conversation.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Josh. This is is this going to be our fourth episode behind the scenes? Where Don't Sue Us Please, also known as DSUP, the superhero podcast. I'm Nora. I'm the host and creative producer.
And I am John. I am one of the co-writers on Wonder Woman and the writer on some upcoming things that we have not announced yet.
We've just teased during the 1 hour I had to drive home. I got on and I was like, what is happening to my Twitter right now? And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. So check out our Twitter if you have not yet, because it's going to be the death of me. Today, we're going to have a lovely discussion in celebration and honor of Pride Month. So we'll be wrapping up the month of June with a special episode with John and exploring the world of comic books and Pride and all things LGBTQ plus and Wonder Woman. So,
Yes.
yeah. So do you want to start? Is there anywhere you'd like to start? Do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
I should start with a disclaimer, which is I do not have a degree in gender studies or queer studies. My thoughts are just based on my observations, my love of comics, and my own personal experience. So I apologize if I get something wrong. I'm just going by what I sort of observe and things that I have thought. So I just want to make sure that nobody thinks that I am speaking as a PhD in gender studies or queer studies.
Great. I mean, for anyone that is listening, watching, we would love to engage in thoughtful conversation. So if you do have feelings about anything we discussed, feel free to send us an email, shoot us a tweet. We are doing this in part to celebrate, but also to lend a platform, bring awareness, and have those thoughtful conversations. So we would love to engage with people. Do you want to give a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I'll do my comic background. I started reading Wonder Woman roughly 43 years ago. 1976 was the first time I picked up a Wonder Woman. And just to make myself feel older, comic books at that time were a quarter. So
I love that.
That was my weekly allowance. And there was a little wire spinner rack at the local like mini grocery store kind of thing. And I believe I had seen Wonder Woman Super Friends, and that's how it sort of made the connection. So I picked up Wonder Woman Volume 1, number 226. Steve Trevor had just come back to life for the first time and was going by a different name. And there was something about this very powerful, but also very compassionate woman that that spoke to me. I From there, I was kind of a DC kid, I think, as a child. So I read a lot of, like, pretty much anything that had Batgirl, Supergirl, Wonder Girl, Black Canary, Hawk Girl. I picked up a lot of very random issues just because they were in it. I was always very attracted to female characters. If you actually I'm looking at my, you know, many, many boxes of comics, and I think 98% of them probably are female led. And the ones that are not are probably have um, queer leads in the character, because now we have that. Um, and yeah, how was that? That was a little rambly, but I'm just going to go
No,
with it.
I love learning about that, because we have talked about it some, outside of our interviews, obviously, and in our interviews. But it's just always interesting to get to know you better and hear a little bit more. Um, that's really fun. Why? What about the female characters kind of like drew you in?
Oh,
Is it style? Is it personality? Is it like what? Why did you identify with them so much?
um, so I'm going to give an answer as an adult that I definitely could not have given as a child. And I think there's two things that go to that. I think first, the way that comics have been written, um, there was always sort of a dichotomy, um, conscious or unconscious, with female characters, where the idea of femininity and maternal instinct and caring and compassion are very distinctly at odds with going into a fight, which is considered, certainly at the time, was considered, men are strong and men are powerful and men throw punches and that's not what women do. So I think that part, certainly unconsciously as a child, um, was very interesting to me. I think there is, as a queer person, I think and I consider myself cisgendered. I identify as a male. But I do think that there is an identification with the female, and I'm not sure what that is. I think some of it has to do with the fact that there is I don't know what that is, but I think a lot of gay men certainly do identify with female characters. Some of that I think comes from, as a child, you don't understand what attraction is. You don't understand sexuality. You don't understand sexual orientation, gender identity, any of that. But what you see is, oh, here is a woman that men are interested in. I want a male to be interested in me. You're thinking this unconsciously. Therefore, this is what I'm identifying with, because this is the early 70s. There were certainly, no out characters in comic books. Um, and I think so I think some of it does come from that. I think also, um, in a lot of the women's sort of secret identities, they were sort of these klutzy, you know, I'm wearing glasses, so that means that I'm unattractive. I say this as I have my glasses on my forehead. I'm going to put them on my face. But, oh, I'm wearing glasses and I'm klutzy and I'm unattractive and my other self is glamorous. And I think that there is a sense as a child, as a queer child, you have to hide this part of yourself behind you. You want to go under the radar as much as possible. And then you think, maybe I can let these other parts of me out when I'm playing, when I'm, in the backyard tending to, I'll be Wonder Woman, I'll be Wonder Woman. And you sort of have this moment of letting that more powerful, more glamorous, more true part of yourself fly free. Am I making any sense at all, Nora, or am I just...
Yes, this is no, it's so beautiful and interesting. And I mean, what you're saying about the duality of these female characters, where I mean, a lot of the male characters, I mean, we all know that I am not a comic expert whatsoever. But I have watched Barry Allen in The Flash because he's adorable. That's what gets me into comics, is if we have a really cute actor, but you know, whatever. It helps. But they're very, a lot of and a lot of the older ones are just very surface level masculine, where the women have these kind of dualities of being able to be strong and feminine, and what does that look like, and what does that where does that live? And I think um as a girl, I've always found that really interesting, and all of that as well. You know, it kind of in the same vein, where it's easier sometimes to just be very ditzy, or like, oh, can you help me? Because it's just easier. And seeing these women take on that strength, and being able to do what the male superheroes do, but do it in a way that is so genuine and so caring, is definitely so different, I think. So no, that made a lot of sense, and it was really enlightening, and I hadn't thought about it, but I kind of like felt it in a way.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think if you look at, there's really Clark Kent, who is kind of nerdy and accident prone, but, the vast majority, sort of the male superhero identities are, they're playboys, or they're, scientists. They're very charming. They're very, they're kind of allowed to be much closer to their superhero identity. Um, and I think as we have progressed over the last 50 years of my life, there is a, we're never there yet, but there is more of an understanding that, this group of qualities is not masculine, and this group of qualities is not feminine, and sort of going, well, you can be powerful and strong and compassionate and loving. You can be the person who stands up to a bully and also know how to fight. We've sort of encamped these traits within the idea of masculine and the idea of feminine, as opposed to saying, well, all of these things can exist in one person. We're coming closer, I think, to the idea of Anne Frank wrote that she was a little bundle of contradictions. And the idea being that we are all many, many things, and they're not all, we are contradictory in many ways. We think one thing in one situation, but then we think something different in a similar situation. There's just something that's slightly tweaked about that.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think, yeah, that what you're saying about those dualities, and the gender traits that we tend to identify with that fluidity that we're starting to find, I think, more as a society. I think that a lot of the female superheroes embodied that in a sense, which makes a lot of sense why you were so drawn to them, because that is a really interesting way to examine gender and gender norms.
There's so the comic character of Captain Marvel started out as a character, Ms. Marvel, written by Chris Claremont, who's a very famous comic book writer. He was the one who really made the X-Men kind of thing. And he wrote Ms. Marvel. And I remember there were a lot of letter columns, and there were a lot of interviews that he did talking about, he became very much known at Marvel as writing female characters, as the the go-to male, I'm using air quotes because I keep forgetting that people can't see me and this is just audio. I'm using air quotes for this, but he was known as the go-to guy for writing female characters. And I remember him saying in some interview that he would often get letters talking about, well, Ms. Marvel is just, she's a dude with breasts and that's all she is, because she punches people and she's really strong. And so, reading that as like a 6 or 7-year-old reading, the letters to the editor in the back of comic books, it was one of those things that it was kind of the first time that it became clear to me that there was a difference between men and women. I should preface this by saying my mom was the primary breadwinner in our family, and I grew up 2 older sisters. And while my dad worked, my mom was the one who had a steady paycheck. And it was, rightly or wrongly, kind of gender, religion, even sexual orientation, as much as it was not discussed back then. It was never anything that was brought up to us as different. So we kind of, as kids, had to wait until we interacted with other people to realize that, oh, there's people actually think there's a difference. In our household, it was just, oh, here's the difference between a boy and a girl. A boy has this and a girl has this. And that was kind of the end of it. Oh, here's the difference between our religion and their religion. They believe this and we believe that. So it didn't really enter my sisters and I consciousness until we went out and interacted with other people, that people saw these differences as inequities, as this is good, this is bad. Rightly or wrongly, I don't know if my parents were not great for preparing us for that, or if they were just like, this is what we think, so you're going to think that, and then other people can say whatever they want. I don't know if that was a conscious decision or just, we don't want to have these conversations.
Well, no, that's understandable. I mean, I guess I have a similar experience in terms of like learning about the LGBTQ plus community. I have several cousins that are gay, like lesbians. I don't know. I just always, there wasn't as much differentiation, I think, when I was like learning. But I had one cousin in particular who dated this girl, Miranda, who was lovely for the longest time. We still keep in touch with her. We love Miranda. She's still like Aunt Miranda. Even they aren't together anymore, but she is still Aunt Miranda to some of my cousins. So, but I remember like asking, like probably like 3 or 4 years old, like, "Mommy, why does Rachel always kiss that girl? Like, why does she always bring this girl to family events?" And my parents were just like, "Some girls like girls and some boys like boys." And I was like, "That makes perfect sense. Like, that's super logical. If like girls like boys, why wouldn't they like girls? Like, duh." And I lived in the South. So, like, I grew up in Texas at a private Catholic school at that time, and I remember like no one discussed it. So like I always believed like everyone like, yeah, that's super normal. Like some girls like girls and some girls like boys. Duh. And then I moved to Colorado where people talked about it and talked about it in a negative way. And that was like my first experience hearing it. And I remember being like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, obviously. Like, what? Like it was the most confusing thing. And I totally understand that it's really weird when you go out into the world and then you realize that other people believe in inequities that you never learned.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting. Anyway, Rachel married a boy, and I was very heartbroken for a very long time. I mean, I'm very happy. I love her being happy. I have no qualms with anyone's sexuality, but I just like as a child, that was my first like, oh, girls can like girls, and Rachel likes girls. And then I remember being like, she married a boy. I was heartbroken. So
Well, tell Aunt Miranda I said hi.
I will. I'm really, I'm still rooting for Aunt Miranda to marry into the family. Um, love her to death. She is just precious. So anyway, sorry, Rachel, if you end up listening to this. I love you dearly. Jesse's good too. I just not as much. But yeah, no, it's interesting to find out those things that people view as inequities later in life when you've never had that that understanding of them in the same way. So that is really interesting to learn later.
Mm-hmm. And one of those things that I always find fascinating with people who read comics, and there are, you know, as in everywhere, and people should believe what they want to believe and think what they want to think. This is, you know, I may not agree with it all. I definitely won't agree with it all, but, you know, I'm not here to change anybody's mind. I'm just, but I'm sort of fascinated when people um, say things like, well, queer people don't belong in comic books. And I always am fascinated by that for a couple of reasons. Historically, if you look at comic books, they are very, very political being. They have always been very political. Superman, in one of his very first appearances, traps a bunch of robber barons in a coal mine so that they can see that the working conditions are bad. There's a whole lot of things of um, people trying to bust labor unions that superheroes, go in and they stop and they teach the wealthy class, you know, you have to support the working class. Wonder Woman is inherently an extremely political character. It comes from a she comes from a sociological and a feminist point of view. So I'm always sort of fascinated when people say, like, well, why does this character have to be gay now? Why does this character have to be non-binary now? Why do we have to see that in comics? You have to, I believe, in all art, and I think that comics are art as much as I think that anything is art, you have to reflect the world around you. The first time that I saw a character say "I'm gay" was in a Wonder Woman comic, um, and that was really a minor character in the background, but um, there it was on the comic page. Mindy Mayer was the only, Mindy was the only one in my family who didn't hate me for being gay. There it was, this character saying that. So the idea that would not want to, the idea that we would not want to introduce as many different types of people in comics, in culture, in art is very strange to me, because I think, how would you function as a human being who's never met anyone other than someone exactly like you are? How would you function in a larger society when all of a sudden you meet people who are different than you? Wouldn't you want to prepare for that somehow? Wouldn't you want to understand that there are all of these amazingly rich cultural backgrounds, be it people of color, people in the queer community, or people who are different religions, people who have no religion? Wouldn't you want to introduce your child to the idea that the world is a vast and exciting place where we all learn from each other and experience each other? I know this sounds very Pollyanna-ish and very naive, but the idea that you would not want to explore that culturally is very, very strange to me. Sorry, that was very weirdly off topic. We are very
No, I think that you're exactly right. I mean, as soon as you said, like, there are people that don't understand why we have gay characters and queer characters in comic books, my first thought was just, but so many of the superheroes in my life have been queer. Like, why would you? Those are my real life superheroes, are people that are queer, and to not have that in comics would be so bizarre to me. Um, like, those are the people that are fighting for other humans so often, that are just some of the most loving and compassionate and kind and embracing people that'll fight for others, and demand justice for everyone, and to not include them in a world where that's the primary focus just seems so outlandish to me. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting that to bring up that point that there are people that don't feel that way.
Yeah, it's just very strange to me. It's one of those things where um, I always sort of think, what are you getting out of comics that you're saying that this shouldn't appear? Because to me, it's, obviously there's the big action sequences and those are always fun and those are always interesting. But, the very essence of being a hero is going to bed at night, having done something during the day to make the world a better place for everyone. So it's just very strange to me. It's just very strange to me why anyone would not want to feel that way. I think Wonder Woman, specifically, has spoken to queer people and the queer community. And again, this is just my observations. I'm not a scholar by any stretch of the imagination. Is the idea of, well, here is this island that has been separated from the world for 2,000 to 3,000 years, where there are only women on it. The idea that same-sex relationships wouldn't have happened is just very strange to me. That anyone would think, oh, that never happened. You're like, well, why wouldn't that happen? So I think that's part of it. And again, looking at, comics that have been around since 1941, looking at it through a modern eye. But also the idea of, the very original Wonder Woman origin from the 40s is very much a sort of flipped Disney princess narrative, where generally in the Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, the male removes the female from danger and sort of stands between her and the villain. This is very much the opposite, where the woman is leaving a place of perfection and peace and love and immortality, and where there is no want, there is no hate, there is no need, and going into a world to protect the man and to say to the larger world, man's world, men in general, there is a much better way to do this. And if we all simply just loved each other, you would find all of these other crap to go away, and for years, the if you look historically at the gay rights movement and the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis and the Gay Liberation Front, et cetera, you see this sort of move from saying, if you as a straight society would just look at us with the same eye that you look with each other at, we'll be okay. And then, of course, as with anybody who is oppressed for a very long time, it resulted in the Stonewall riots, revolutions, which was not the first revolution by any chance. If you ever get a chance, look up Cooper's Donuts. That's another fascinating story. And people sort of forget the gay liberation that I, as a queer person, enjoy today does not come from rich, masculine, white dudes. It comes from people of color and transgender women and trans men who are like, we're not doing this anymore. We are no longer asking you to respect us because we've asked you this for hundreds and thousands of years, and that just simply asking longer enough. So we are going to take our respect and demand that you give it to us. And if you don't want to, that is now your problem. It is no longer my problem. I think comics sort of, I want to say that comics are always ahead of the time, and that's not the actuality of the situation, because business, film, television, comics, literature might be an exception to it. I'd have to really think about that. But they always sort of reflect things later. There's a lot of queer coding in comics in the 70s and the 80s, until where there's sort of very stereotypical characters, and there's a lot of things that are going on until, and there's, if you look up Extrano, which is just, it's one of those things where I just go, I understand what you were trying to do. I understand that you were trying to be sensitive, but you just really did it really poorly. One of those things that doesn't age well, like when you're watching, like,
Oh,
yeah, one of those things that doesn't age well. There was Extrano. There was a scene in a Hulk comic where Bruce Banner was going to be sexually assaulted by a man. Of course, he turned into anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on in there. But I kind of want to say it probably wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s, again, I'm not a scholar, where queer people kind of became mainstream enough that they started appearing in comics in ways that were less stereotypical. There was Maggie Sawyer in Superman. There was this is a short list. There were, it. Are we there yet? No. Are we at a point where there can be, where we can go, oh, we got it all right? No, we'll probably never be there in my lifetime. But yeah, I'm sorry. Once again, I went off.
No,
I
no, I love it. I will say you did bring up art, being ahead of its time to some extent, but also reflecting. My senior year, I was in a graduate course under like one of my favorite teachers that was about musical theater and musical theater history and its evolution, but from a musicology perspective. And I did this whole paper on musical theater and how it was always ahead of its time in terms of bringing awareness to the queer community, and how it started off with like and I talked about how it was originally the LGBT community and its evolution, and how it tied into theater, and how theater really has been trying to push those boundaries, because so many of theater's creators, like we wouldn't even have theater without the queer community. And so I wrote, I'm going to send it to you sometime because I think you'd enjoy it. But I actually talked about the Stonewall Inn riots, and the different shows that had gotten shut down, and the different bills that had been passed to try and censor Broadway, which, newsflash, like Broadway, it doesn't agree with censorship at all. It's like they've just been like, we're going to find a way around it. And they did. But I did talk about the Stonewall Inn riots, and fun fact, they had kick lines during those riots. And I just thought that was the most fabulous way to have. I was like, I would expect nothing less from the New York community than to have kick lines during a riot. That was just heartwarming in a sense. Like, it's so sad but then I was like, but they were just incredible people. Like, they weren't going to let anything rain on their parade, and they did not. They burned down the city, and they had a kick line while doing it. And I just thought that was the most fabulous thing I've ever heard. So
yes.
I called it out of the closet and onto the stage, Broadway, a history or something like that. Mm-hmm. Very proud of that. So I'll send it to you. I think you'd enjoy it, since we're both musical theater geeks a little bit.
Yes, very much so. This actually brings up an interesting point to me, which may not be interesting to anybody else, but I'm going to try to make it interesting. So the first thing is, just to respond to that, I have been sort of doing a lot of research this month. Not really research, but watching a lot of clips of Boys in the Band, which took It was
That's
written in 1968.
one of our shows. He recently passed away. We were so
Yes.
sad.
Yes.
Yeah, he
Barpal.
was. It was so sad. It was so sad. Our agents were very very sad when that happened.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue your
Oh,
point.
No, please interrupt. Please do, because otherwise I'm going to just keep going. But it's interesting. I don't know if you've read the play or the movie, or saw the revival that was just on in New York. But there's a lot of talk about, oh, this play is so negative about gay people. This play is, there's so much self-hatred and there's so much internalized homophobia. And what's sort of fascinating is, because I read it, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago in college. And I've seen the movie, and I didn't get a chance to see the Broadway show, but it's interesting because to me, it does not come across as internalized homophobia. It's very clearly, to me, anger. And when you cannot lash out because, remember, this is 1968, there were no legal protections anywhere. So you could lose your job, you could lose your apartment, you could lose your family, you could be put into an institution. Where can you lash out? You can't do it societally. So, at that point, I don't know if if you've ever heard of the Mattachine Society, but they were one of the early gay activist groups. And when they would do marches, they were like, we have to be peaceful. All the women must wear skirts and dresses, and all the men must wear suits and ties. So there was, again, this sort of like, we move towards assimilation, towards acceptance, towards we're just like you. And I think one of the things that Boys in the Band is, subtextually for me is so fascinating. It's because when you have this anger that cannot come out societally, who does it come out towards? It comes out towards your friends who are in the same exact position and who understand you're not mad at me, you're mad at all of this other stuff that you can't express. So I'm going to take the brunt of your anger because there's nowhere else for it to go. And I know next week I'm going to be angry. So I do think that there is, culturally speaking, I do think that there is an anger to late 60s, early 70s gay culture that very rightfully there, and very rightfully, people, people are angry for a reason. Nobody wants to just walk around and be angry. There is a reason for it. But that being said, hard right turn here. I think culturally, and I'm speaking to like William Haynes movies from the 1930s, and even some of Charlie Chaplin's work. And if you look at some of the early sort of genre movies where queer people begin to come out, like Partners with Ryan O'Neal and John Hurd, some other things. In comics, I believe there is some reflection there, which is, I think when people move towards an acceptance, when people are when that pendulum of understanding or of acknowledgement is probably the better word for it, when that pendulum of acknowledgement and saying, oh, these people actually exist, this group, this subgroup exists in the world, I think that there is a tendency to sort of try to make it appear non-threatening. And so it appears in very campy ways at first. If you look at some of the 80s comics, there were some campy, not outwardly queer, but campy coded queer characters that appeared there. And I think that, again, that's a larger cultural thing that in art, that people have to, you sort of navigate through that, and you go from camp to stereotype until you get to a point where you have fully fleshed out characters who happen to be in this case, queer. And that's part of them, but that's not the sum total of their existence. And I think one of the things that people sort of have to go through culturally is this idea of having to say, well, why is this character queer? Their story isn't about them, you know, getting acceptance or being gay or dealing with this or dealing with that, or your story is not about being trans or being non-binary. And I think now we are starting to enter the point where people have stopped saying that the default for every character culturally, artistically, is straight, white, and male, and stories are becoming characters, not stories. Let me amend. Characters are becoming, we're beginning, you know, like centimeters at a time, we're moving forward to the point where we're saying, well, why does this character have to be straight, white, and male? There's nothing that fundamentally changes if this character is none of those things. So why is that our default? And I think maybe we're beginning to get there. We're not anywhere near there yet. But hopefully we'll get there one day. Again, that's Pollyanna-ish of me, but I'm gonna stay with trying, as my mother said, I'd rather believe the best in people and be disappointed than just continually believe the worst in people and have that proven time and time again.
No, that is a fair thing. It's hard to do as well, though. So I applaud you in your optimism continuously, because you really, I think, are the most optimistic person on our team, always.
It's not about myself. If I'm going to make a joke, it's only going to be about me.
Well, we think you are absolutely fabulous. I did want to say, because you brought up how difficult things were in the 60s and 70s and have continued to be, and that kind of anger geared at inwardly or towards like loved ones because you didn't have those protections. Yay that the Supreme Court finally protected people. So that is one highlight that we can bring up in the year 2020.
We have one. We have a step in the right direction.
It's been 6 months.
I'll take that step.
That's the only positive thing that has happened this year, but I'll take it. At least it was a really positive thing. So that's our 2020 wrap up, guys. That's our positivity for 2020. Check back in 6 months and see if anything else has gone right. But that was, I think, at least something that we can point to and say, I think that there are positive steps being made here and there. So that was a yay moment of 2020 for us. Like I said, the only thing that has gone right in 2020, but we did have that. So celebrating the little victories here.
I will take any little victories. I'm always good for that.
Yeah, no, you are always the most, like I said, positive one that believes in the world out of all of us.
Yeah, I try. Don't always succeed, but I try. And actually, strangely enough, part of that, and this is just me, sort of part of that, when I want to be cynical or angry, I stop myself, and I have said to friends of mine who are also comic book nerds, and I've often said myself, but if I don't said myself, I've said to myself and to my friends, if I don't look for the best in people, how can I be worthy of calling myself an Amazon? And
I love that.
And I think we have to, I have to try to continually remind myself to be kind and compassionate when someone else is not. Because, sort of, one of the things that I find fascinating about Wonder Woman is there's often kind of two ways of reading her, which is she's a warrior with an axe in her hand, or she is passionate and won't ever, just, tries to tie you up in her lasso so you can't hurt anybody. And again, I think that we need to accept that both of those things exist. But yeah, there's this thing where I think what a lot of people write about Wonder Woman is she's never going to be the one to throw the first punch. She'll throw the hardest punch, put you out, but she'll never throw the first punch because she's always going to try to give you a chance to be a better person, to try to make things right. I
What is
don't.
that, a Aristocats quote? A lady doesn't start fights, but she'll finish them.
Oh, geez, Nora, it's been like 30 years since I've seen the Aristocats. Now I have to. I guess I finally
it's a
have
cute
to.
one.
I guess I finally have to subscribe to Disney Plus. Maybe.
I just see it like printed on like mugs and stuff. But like, a lady doesn't start fights, but she'll finish them is like kind of, I feel like, really sums up some of that.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know if that speaks to anyone else's queer identity, but it speaks to mine in the sense of sort of the process of coming out and sort of expecting the worst thing to happen and saying, well, I have to give you time to, and again, this is for me, I have to give you time to get used to it. I have to give you time to come around because you will come around. Whether or not that actually happens, I was very lucky. My coming out process was super simple, very easy. One of my sisters went, yeah, I know. The other sister said, is there anything else? Because if there's nothing else, I was watching a football game and it doesn't change anything, but I'd really like to get back to the football game. I was like, totally cool. And my parents were super great about it. But, sort of the idea of trying to say to the world, not only does it get better, but you will get better. You, the collective you, us, humanity will get better. I do think that speaks to a lot of it. It seems to me to speak to a lot of queer identity. Again, I'm only speaking from my experience, but I would like to believe that the world. I would like to believe that one day we will get to the point of a larger acceptance of people. One of my favorite quotes of Wonder Woman, and I'm going to butcher it, and I apologize in advance, written by Phil Jimenez, who is an openly gay artist and writer who grew up loving Wonder Woman. But he was having her give a speech. And one of the things she said was, if the prospect of living in a world where respecting the basic human rights of those around you and valuing each other simply because we exist are such daunting, impossible tasks, and what kind of world are we left with, and what kind of world do you actually want to live in? And that is, to me, kind of the essence of her character. Now, he certainly had a very specific, he grew up with Linda Carter, which again, that TV series has a bit of the camp element to it, which I think is one of the things that draws queer people to Wonder Woman, is that there is a campiness to it.
I'm sorry, I'm still listening. My TV just turned back on.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I do think that there is that campiness element to it. And Phil Jimenez, grew up very much loving the Linda Carter episodes, as did, I think, all of us. But to me, that is very much the essence of Wonder Woman. Is it the essence of queer people? I think so. Maybe. For me, I sort of feel like, while I have a lot of anger and I understand the anger, I think I personally again, try to get to the point of, what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world do I want to leave as a legacy? Would I want to leave, do I want to leave just my anger behind? I I don't, but conversely, I was also young-ish during the beginning of the AIDS HIV crisis, and if anyone who's listening, if you don't know who Larry Kramer is, I would highly advise you, um, you at the very least look up Larry Kramer, if not watch The Normal Heart, so that you can get an understanding of um, what real anger is and what real anger can do, and should do, in a society that's saying to you, you don't matter. Wow, I really went for it there.
No, I love it. I love it. I just honestly, since we've been working on this project and everything, think you're such a kind and inspiring person. And
Well,
so it's
thank
it's always lovely to hear you talk. And I always love that every episode so far I've gotten a new quote for us when we get a merch store. This one being about living as an Amazon, like what do you do to deserve being an Amazon? Like what would an Amazon do? I think we need to come up with like a slogan around that for t-shirts.
I'm all for it. How can I be
Being
worthy
worthy
of
of
being an
being an
Amazon?
yeah, how can you be worthy of being an Amazon? Those are worth I'm gonna live by. And also make t-shirts out of. Uh so look for those soon in our merch store that doesn't exist yet. But I really do love that. That's such a beautiful concept. So and I really liked, I think that was kind of one of the moments I loved the most in our series was uh when Diana's fighting Ares and is and the cheetah and is going to become, he's saying you're going to be my champion, and the grace she shows, um and that moment where she says I'm the daughter of this god, and therefore I have these traits and qualities, and I'm the daughter of this god, and all these things, and she's listing out all of these qualities she possesses that are just so broad, and then and in a way that's not arrogant but is empowering, and then she has such grace in the way she saves the day,
Mhm.
was just a moment I literally like had goosebumps listening to that and like almost cried. And I was like, I remember the first time I listened to it after we posted it, I was driving and I was like almost crying. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. I know this whole story. I already know all of this. Why am I crying in my car? This is insane. But like that moment of just I just thought you guys captured that energy so well of just who she is and what she stands for and everything about her, and that empowerment element, and as a female, just having her to look to, and then she's so powerful and she's so strong and she's capturing all of this from all of these other people, but doing it her own way, and then with this grace about her is just such a an inspiring thing. So yeah, that was a moment I really loved that really showcased that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Um, Now, I do want to just make sure, there are a lot of queer characters out there. There are a lot of queer creators out there. Um, some of my favorite queer writers are Vita Ayala, who is a non-binary person of color, Danny Lore, who is also a non-binary and other person of color, Steve Orlando, who writes for both Marvel and DC, um, Howard Cruz, who passed away recently, but whose graphic novel, Stuck Rubber Baby, was the first queer-themed book that was published by a mainstream publisher. It was published by DC I believe under their Vertigo imprint. I might be wrong about that. I should have done my research before I did this. But anyway, there is Mags Visaggio, who is a trans woman who wrote a book called Kim and Kim. Vita's done a million things for Marvel, a million things for DC, including Wonder Woman. They and Danny are writing James Bond for Dynamite. So there's a lot of Steve Orlando has written Wonder Woman as well. There's a million others. I'm forgetting people, and my apologies. There's a lot of queer characters out there. Obviously, there's Batwoman. Obviously, there's Renee Montoya, The Question. There's Hulkling and Wiccan. There's I would highly, highly recommend just Googling web comics or indie comics, LGBT or queer. You will find some really, really wonderful stuff out there. The amount of creativity, and I certainly think the internet has helped many people. As much as there are parts of the internet that are dumpster fires, I think one of the great things about the internet is it lets people know they are not alone. I sort of always try to say human beings are very different from each other. Human experience is extremely universal. Everybody falls in love. Everybody has their heart broken. Everybody has done things they're proud of. Everybody has done things that they're ashamed of. Everybody wants to be safe and be better. All of human experience is extremely universal. But what you will find from these, from just Googling queer comics, LGBTQ, web comics, LGBTQ, you will find some really wonderful creators saying really important and inspiring and beautiful things about beyond just what it is to be a queer person, what it is to be a human being from a queer perspective. There's sort of whole arguments about there that I can get into about Harvey Fierstein and what he wrote about, is there a gay sensibility? Is there not a gay sensibility? And I remember one year being at the Lambda Awards, which are literary awards for LGBTQ books. And there was a big argument one year as to, well, what if the writer is queer, but none of their characters are? And what if the writer is straight, but the characters are queer? Essentially what I'm saying is that there is a ton of stuff out there. Simple Google search will find it for you. Some of my, I always tend to kind of go for some of them, because when I'm going to bed at night, the last thing I want to do is read something that's going to get me angry. I don't want any more bad dreams than I have. I have enough difficulty sleeping. So I'll go for something like My Brother's Husband, which is a book by Nora who is an incredible writer and manga artist. That book is absolutely brilliant. It's about a Canadian who goes to meet his deceased lover's twin brother, which is very different than the rest of Tagame's stuff, which is very, very adult erotic. So just make sure if you're Googling that, which Tagame book you're looking for, which style you want. The last thing that you want to do is, stumble somewhere that you don't necessarily want to be, or maybe you're not ready for because you're underage. There's Check Please by Ngozi Ukazu, who raised the most money ever for a graphic novel on Kickstarter, who writes about, I believe she's a first generation immigrant from Africa, and she wrote about two hockey players falling in love at a small school in New England. And those tend to be kind of the things that I read when I'm nodding off because I want good, sweet dreams. I am one of those people that believes, with the exception of a very few things that I sort of have safely sealed up and locked away, comics and books, I believe that comics and art and books and movies. I think that those things are meant to be loved and meant to be seen and meant to be touched and smelt and fallen asleep on your, you know, on your chest or sometimes underneath you, because sometimes you know, I roll over and, you know, I am a big proponent in never feeling like, you know, oh, I want to keep this to myself. I don't want other people to discover this. Well, you know, I want, you know, like I said, art is meant to be loved. Books are meant to be loved. Comics are meant to be loved. And I would find it very odd to not want to recommend something to somebody if they're
I
interested.
love that. Well, I love that. I think we should have a John's recommendation page. We're making it happen. I'm adding it to the website. Made the
Okay.
executive decision. No one listens to me, so I don't know what that means.
I listen to you, Nora.
So you're my favorite.
Heart.
So no, I think that would be great. You know, I know you've steered me in the right direction with a lot of different content you've been recommending to me. Because, you know, as everyone has learned throughout this podcast, our viewers and the people that accidentally hired me, I know nothing about comics. So I feel like you have you know, recommended such interesting and non-traditional in a way, some of the stuff where it's not just your average, like, oh, Superman thing. So I think that's been really fun for me to get to learn more.
Oh, good.
So I think that'd be really fun for all of our listeners. So I think, you know, maybe it becomes a spin-off where you just talk about things all the time.
Hey, you know what? I would be more than happy to, you know, have a podcast. If anybody out there wants to do a collab, is that the word?
Yeah.
Am I was like,
you're hip.
Well, what I would actually love is to do something where I talk to someone offline for a bit, recommend 4 or 5 things, and then the actual podcast is us just talking about it. And be like,
love this.
What'd you like? What you didn't like? Why did that not work for you?
Josh and I are ready to do it. Because we do it. So anyway, if you're interested in being on John's new podcast, please hit us up. Our email is thesuperheropodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. Or tweet us.
If somebody wants some recommendations, email us, tweet us. What's our Twitter handle? Is that the right word?
Yes, the Superhero Podcast. You can find us on all platforms as the Superhero Podcast.
You know, set up a time. Nora will forward the email to me. I will set up a time to speak with you. We'll talk about like what you actually like, what you don't actually like. I will recommend some things, and then we will, you know, we will put this behind we'll put the conversation behind the Patreon wall, but we'll set it at a very easy price point so that everyone will have access to it. And yeah, I would be totally down for that. I've literally been in the house with the exception of going to the grocery store for.
You got me started on a new thing, John. Also, musicals. John and I are happy to recommend musicals.
Yes, I would love to. There's actually Nora, a musical that you could listen to. I don't believe the whole YouTube. I think you actually have to buy the CD for it. But there was a musical that was produced in the early 70s. I want to say 71, 72, called Boy Meets Boy. And
I wrote about that in my paper.
Ah, yes.
But I have not listened to the whole thing. So I will do that.
Yes, it took place in the 1930s where gay marriage exists. Actually, fun fact, I actually performed a play when I first moved to New York that was on the same stage as that musical. And I have no idea, because the backstage was so freaking small, how the hell they did a musical on that stage. I don't know. I applaud them. It was genius, I'm sure. But yeah, just I believe it was the Actors Playhouse. I think that's what it was called. It's no longer there. I think it's a restaurant now.
Ooh, well, we should go dine there. Maybe we'll make it a new meetup spot when we get back to New York, because we usually go to Andrew's Coffee, which we will continue to support because we love Andrew's. Shout out to Andrew's. But I think maybe another good spot would be now. What is that? Whatever that restaurant is. What is your favorite soundtrack of the moment? We'll throw out a little fun musical theater
A little
reference here
musical
at the end.
theater. Okay, so I'm gonna go with I can't pick one. Can I pick? How many can I pick? 3?
Top 3 at the moment.
Okay. So I've been listening over and over again to the musical Yank,
Okay.
which was out maybe, I want to say the first version was maybe 10 years ago. And it's a musical about 2 soldiers who fall in love during World War II. And I'm doing that for the reason that one of my other writing projects, it's putting me in the headspace. So that's one. I'm going to go with The Wild Party, but the Michael John LaChiusa, even though I have the Andrew Lippa, and that is the one that kind of has taken off and had its own life. There's parts of the Michael John LaChiusa score that I really love. And then the other thing that I have been doing is kind of going back and forth on YouTube between videos of Dreamgirls and videos of a chorus line. So I'm going to tie those two. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to tie them.
Ooh. But I'd say 6 has been heavy rotation lately.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the female empowerment is just so great in that one, where I'm just like, yes, actual queens. Quite literally. So that's really cute. I love that one. Lucy Mouse is just brilliant. Is it Toby Maguire? No, Toby. God, what is his last name? Toby and Lucy are the best. They are absolutely wonderful writers. I heard her speak at Women's Day and on Broadway, which was brilliant.
Nice.
So that was great. And I showed my grandma, who loves it.
Oh,
we listened
nice,
on a car ride. She's a very big Six fan now. She's very excited that I'm staying back and forth with her because she's been sick. So I've been staying with her and showing her all the latest, like what was hot on Broadway before I left. And she's like, I know things that no one else in the family that likes musicals knows. And so she'll like talk to my aunt who's into musicals, and she'll be like, oh yeah, have you heard about this musical? And I'm like, oh my God, stop it. So pure. I showed her Bandstand recently, which was really fun.
Very nice.
One of ours, which I've been really into lately. It's just the music is so good, and I get goosebumps every time they sing the part where he's talking about backed up by my brothers in arms. Every time I get goosebumps. It's just such a beautiful soundtrack. And then I will say I've been listening to a lot of Legally Blonde lately because, again, I showed my grandma. We listened to it on a car ride, and she had not seen the movie yet. And so she asked lots of questions. We were on our way to my aunt's. And so then she was telling my aunt that we had listened to the soundtrack, but she didn't know the movie. So they watched 1 and 2. And then when I took her back to her house, we listened to the soundtrack again so that she understood it with the context of the movie. And then she pointed out all the parts that weren't in the movie, and we had to discuss and what was happening on stage at the time and why it was changed. So it was very cute. It's very cute that my whole family has been, a lot of them were already into musicals, but now has been, they're so supportive of it that they're like, well, what's going on Broadway right now? And when can we come see you in New York? And when can we, what would you recommend? And now they all have to know what's happening with musicals all the time. It is the sweetest thing. I'm so lucky that they all support musicals so much. But yeah, so I've been doing a lot of driving. So I've been listening to a lot of soundtracks, and those are the ones that just keep popping up for me right now.
All right. So I have not heard 6 yet, so I should listen to that.
Oh my God. When we all get back to New York, John, you and I are going to 6.
Okay.
It's great. It's so cute. I love it. I use the word cute too much. This is a very powerful story about women, written by a very powerful woman. And then wonderful human beings, both of them, that are that they both are just absolutely incredible, brilliant humans that it's just so good. And I want to say that I keep using this word cute, but this is so much more than cute. I just don't have the right words for it. It's brilliant. There's a pun in there. They are so good at like picking up these little pop culture things where one of the characters is very embodying of Beyonce. And she says, okay, ladies, let's get in Reformation, which is so cute. And she's more, she says, like, I'm more rad than Lutheranism at one point. Like, because or she says, like, I'm more radical than Lutheranism. Just like these really, really funny, like, super historically relevant things that are also really pop culture relevant that are just brilliantly done. So yeah, that's brilliant. But that one's great. I highly recommend, and they are all hardcore bops. They are so catchy, just absolutely brilliant writing. So yeah, I highly recommend to everyone. Please go support these wonderful people. They're also both like my age, and it just makes me question my entire life.
Yeah, well, wait until you hit 50 and you're like, oh, what did I do? I do want to circle back to one thing.
Yes.
Which is, in addition to Googling webcomics, LGBTQ, go into your local comic shop. That's what they're there for. There's great comic shops out there. There's a million of them. If you're not sure where to go, or you're not, you can email us. Between Matthew and myself, we can give you recommendations for comic shops in pretty much any state, as well as stores that have amazing mail order. But webcomics are one thing. Don't pirate comics. The creators are there.
We do not believe in pirating art. That is a huge, let's make that real clear. Us as a channel does not believe in that. We support artists and we stand local businesses. So go to your local comic shop.
Go to your local comic shop. Just say to them, I want an LGBTQ comic. I want to read about, I want a love story of, between two women. I want a love story between two men. I want some non-binary characters. I want some trans characters. There's amazing stuff out there. But go to your local comic shop, support your local businesses. That's what they're there for. Don't pirate. And don't sue us, please.
That was a beautiful wrap up. We're good. We're golden.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of the Don't Sue Us Please podcast. For more content, you can find us on all streaming platforms at Don't Sue Us Please. Content like this wouldn't be possible without listeners like you supporting us on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/The Superhero Podcast. Finally, go follow us on social media. We're on all platforms at The Superhero Podcast. Thanks for listening.